As Pokrovsk has essentially fallen to Russians, this video will take a look at the current situation around the city and the broader strategic picture in Ukraine, covering troop influx numbers, casualties, Russian finances, and the effects of Ukrainian strikes on Russian refineries, with a projection for future months and even in some regards, years. What might the future fight bring Ukraine? Let's take a closer look. Big wars can last for years, they're not strategy games. Our sponsor today is Supremacy World War III, and despite it being a real-time strategy game, matches there can last for weeks. That's just how it goes when you lead a real country and build up your forces to fight up to 99 other real human opponents. I love the World War modes, but this time I chose the European map Flashpoint game mode. I build up provinces, manage morale and resources, and research new weapons, all the while I'm conquering my neighbors. Officers offer a new dimension to the game. I can unlock them during play, and I get to keep them forever, using their boosts in different matches. Still, my fave feature is easy crossplay. I check up on my progress a dozen times a day, accessing the match both from my phone and from my desktop computer. More about the game later, but know that Supremacy World War III is free to play. It's truly a grand strategy, and it has a special deal for Binkov viewers. New players will get the elite main battle tank for free. Don't wait up, take over the world now. After Avdiivka fell in February 2024, Russia began advancing more rapidly. The area gained listed here are sourced from Ukraine's Deep State project and the US Institute for the Study of War. By September 2024, Russian forces had approached Pokrovsk. Pokrovsk essentially fell, save for perhaps some houses. The exact situation is fluid, but Ukraine has been losing streets there quickly. Ukraine is also withdrawing from nearby Mirnograd, whose fall is imminent, as it's almost completely encircled. It took roughly 14 more months for Russia to encircle Pokrovsk and nearby Mirnograd. Together, these twin cities form the largest urban area Russia will have captured through combat so far in this war. Pokrovsk was often portrayed as crucial to Ukraine's defenses, a major road and rail hub, also important for its coal mine, and supposedly the last barrier before open fields behind it. But that's no longer the case for most of those claims. Also, the media tends to overstate its strategic importance. Yes, Pokrovsk was a big road and rail node, through which positions to the south like Vuhledar were receiving logistics, and through which the Toretsk area was receiving supplies. While Pokrovsk once served as a key logistics point for such front locations to the southwest, those routes have been since cut off or those points have been captured by Russian forces. Surrounded from three directions for nearly a year, Pokrovsk's logistical value has greatly diminished. The nearby coking coal mines, Ukraine's only ones, ceased operation months ago due to Russian proximity. Ukraine adapted, possibly relying on imported coal from Europe. So what about the claim that Russia will now surge unhindered into Ukraine's flat interior once Pokrovsk falls? Well, it most likely won't happen. To advance rapidly and hold ground, even in areas with little resistance, an army needs vehicles. Without them, you don't really control anything. A handful of soldiers on foot without supplies isn't an occupying force, it's just a raid. But using vehicles today is risky. They're easily spotted and even individual soldiers often get hit by FPV drones, so imagine how visible a group of vehicles is. Unless Russian forces can suppress Ukrainian drone units in a specific sector, there is no chance of a fast vehicle-based push. Drones rely on cameras and line of sight, meaning they're most effective in open terrain with few obstructions like tree lines and houses. Ironically, that makes large flat fields, once ideal for tanks, the easiest ground to monitor and deny. In Ukraine's modern battlefield, the disadvantages of moving in the open far outweigh the potential for a quick dash into enemy lines. That's why we have been seeing small infantry groups inching forward on foot, taking ground bit by bit. It's also why features like tree lines, ravines, or villages, once a defender's advantage, have become preferable for attackers too. Open fields expose you to drones. Hopping from one house turned to rubble to another provides at least some cover. Russia's greater firepower from artillery to guided bombs lets it level buildings one by one just before troops are sent in. That's an extremely slow and time-consuming approach, but one that's been working better than open field assaults. We might also see slightly more vehicle movement during rainy or hazy winter weather when drones' visibility drops, but overall Russian progress will likely stay slow. Looking ahead, when Russia pushes past Pokrovsk, we can roughly guess where it might move next. One possible route runs north of the E50 road, through villages like Hreshne, Novoalexandrivka, Mirne and Shlivka. Another follows a nearby local road through Shevchenko, Dobropilya and Novofedorivka. Russia's stated goal remains the capture of entire Donetsk region. Rather than pushing far west, Moscow may pivot north once it feels it has flanked Ukraine's fortifications south of Kramatorsk. It will also apply pressure directly north from Pokrovsk, though that's where Ukrainian forces are most concentrated. Fast advances are unlikely. Even during Russia's relatively quick push toward Pokrovsk in mid-2024, before Ukraine had time to rebuild its lines, it still took about 2 months to move just 5 miles in one direction. Future offensives beyond Pokrovsk will probably be just as slow, especially against those defenses south of Kramatorsk. In short, Kramatorsk and Slovyansk aren't in danger of falling anytime soon, but Ukraine is facing several growing problems. One issue Ukraine has is that even without major breakthroughs, Russia continues to nibble away at territory all along the front. That's likely by Russian design. Russia today fields a lot more troops in Ukraine, often 50% more than Ukraine on most sectors, and up to double during the opening stages of local offensives. It also rotates frontline units more easily, giving it a pool of rested troops it can redirect to achieve temporary numerical superiority wherever it chooses. But there's a limit to how much that helps. Any area can only hold so many soldiers before logistics, coordination, and exposure to enemy fire becomes a problem. After a certain point, adding more troops brings diminishing returns. That's why Russia is spreading its forces along many parts of the front, forcing Ukraine, short on manpower, to stretch thin everywhere. The result, those small, steady Russian gains we have been seeing all along the front. But even pro-Russian military bloggers admit this advantage has limits. One well-known source, two majors, said in October that despite Russia's numerical edge, drone surveillance continues to halt or slow advances, and there's still no effective counter to it. Offensives also come at a high cost. Attacking means entering enemy lines and suffering losses, requiring a constant flow of replacement troops. To keep that up, Russia has generally raised enlistment incentives, though curiously, while some regional governments have doubled sign-on bonuses since summer, some others have started cutting them, a sign that diminished returns have started in certain regions. Ukraine's military intelligence reports that between January and August 2025, Russia added around 280,000 new troops, and it is on pace to exceed its 2025 recruitment goal of 343,000 by about 15%, reaching 394,000. That's a slight drop from 2024 when Russian Defense Minister Belousov claimed 427,000 new contracts were signed. Independent analysis based on expenditures estimated 370 to 400,000, though discrepancies likely stem from delays in payments and varying bonus amounts. For 2023, official figures were higher still, 540,000 according to the Defense Ministry, though financial data suggested closer to 345,000. The real truth might be somewhere in between. The bottom line is Russia continues to recruit huge numbers of troops, but yearly totals are gradually declining from their 2023 peak. Ukraine, being a smaller country, is recruiting fewer troops each year. The Warsaw-based OSW think tank reported that Ukraine recruited 200,000 new soldiers during 2024. In May of 2025, President Zelensky said Ukraine was bringing in about 26,000 troops per month, while he said Russia was recruiting roughly 60% more. Some former Ukrainian intelligence officers claimed in June that the real figure for Ukraine was around 20,000 per month. Although Russia suffers higher frontline casualties, Ukraine faces a different issue: rising desertion rates. Fewer Russians desert, since doing so forfeits the financial compensation many signed up for. In contrast, most new Ukrainian soldiers are mobilized by law, often unwillingly, and receive far less pay. Data from Ukraine's Office of the Prosecutor General shows a worrying trend. In 2022, only 7,000 troops were charged with being absent without leave, or AWOL. That figure grew 2.5 times in 2023, then fourfold more in 2024. During just the first 7 months of 2025, there were already 110,000 AWOL cases, suggesting a year-end total near 190,000, almost 3 times higher than in 2024. While the growth rate is slowing, the overall scale is alarming and clearly affects Ukraine's manpower at the front. It's important to note that AWOL is not the same as desertion. Soldiers initially marked AWOL may later return to duty. If they don't after a set period, their status becomes desertion. Official desertion numbers are much lower, but that's likely misleading. Most AWOL cases are still unresolved. Between December 2024 and February 2025, 21,000 soldiers returned to duty, but over the next 5 months, only 8,000 more did. That means just 23% of the 190,000 AWOLs in 2025 may rejoin their units. The ratio of desertions to AWOLs in past years also suggests that many of today's AWOLs would qualify as deserters under current standards. The bottom line, Ukraine may lose over 140,000 troops in 2025 to desertion alone. Even if somehow off by 50%, which would be an unlikely error margin, desertions will still exceed the number of soldiers killed in combat this year. And that's a key worry for Ukraine. If somehow morale collapses, if the number of troops willing to fight present at the front line starts collapsing, then yes, Russia could start advancing much faster. Basically, that would mean the war is over. Since the start of the war, Ukraine has lost between 115 and 180,000 troops. In 2025, casualties have declined as Ukraine remains mostly on the defensive, with projected 2025 deaths unlikely to exceed 40,000, even at the high end. Including the seriously wounded, who are several times more numerous, Ukraine's total killed and wounded for 2025 is expected to reach between 105 and 160,000. Some of the wounded will eventually return to duty, but far fewer of the AWOLs likely will. In other words, Russian firepower may no longer be the Ukraine's biggest source of losses. For those interested in Binkov's detailed loss methodology, see our December 2024 video on troop numbers. Russian losses in 2025 appear roughly on par with 2024, but overall Ukraine is losing manpower faster. When comparing new recruits against losses from combat and desertion, the long-term trend for Ukraine does not look good. By year's end, Ukraine might barely keep 2024 frontline troop numbers, if that, while Russia's total could grow by well over 100,000. Those figures align with statements from both sides. In early September 2025, Ukraine's military intelligence reported nearly 700,000 Russian troops in or around Ukraine. That's consistent with Putin's claims. 9 months earlier, President Zelensky estimated 600,000 Russian troops in Ukraine. But as mentioned earlier, Russia can't simply pack all those troops into a single sector and overwhelm Ukrainian defenses. War doesn't scale that way. Instead, Moscow will continue to apply pressure along many points of the front, aiming to create an uneven, fragmented line with small pockets of advance. Ukraine, meanwhile, seeks to keep its front line as straight as possible. Still, gradual territorial losses for Ukraine are expected to continue, measured in high hundreds to 1,000 square kilometers per month, not thousands, with only part of that occurring in Donetsk. If no other factors were at play, Ukraine would eventually face defeat, but Allied aid makes the situation unpredictable. More aid prolongs Ukraine's resistance. Less aid could accelerate its collapse. Since the start of Trump's presidency, US support in cash and material has been minimal, according to Germany's Kiel Institute. Europe has tried to fill the gap, but in the second half of 2025, even European aid has fallen below 2024 levels. If this trend continues, Ukraine's endurance becomes uncertain. Russia, meanwhile, faces its own challenges. Its money coffers are not unlimited. Paying for 400,000 new recruits annually, including salaries and bonuses, costs roughly 2 trillion rubles. SIPRI Institute estimates Russia's 2025 military spending at 15.5 trillion rubles, or around $190 billion. For context, Russia's total exports in 2024 were about $430 billion, with a trade surplus of $150 billion, while its GDP was roughly $2.2 trillion, and the federal budget was around $500 billion. The National Wealth Fund, Russia's rainy day reserve, has dropped from $200 billion in 2022 to just over $150 billion today. These figures illustrate the financial strain of the war. All this is before real long-term effects from recent developments start getting felt. Additional pressures are mounting from Ukrainian strikes on Russian refineries and new US and EU sanctions targeting companies trading in Russian oil and gas. Sanctions may have an even larger impact on Russian finances than the strikes themselves, at least until Russia reorganizes its exports. Ukraine's attacks on Russia's oil and gas are hurting, but the effects on the front lines won't be immediate. It could take a year or years depending on whether the attacks are scaled up further. About 70% of Russian fossil fuel sales come from oil, with 2/3 of that from crude. Even if 40% of refined oil is unavailable, total fossil fuel revenue would drop by some 10%. Refining capacity exceeds actual output, and fossil fuels account for about 31% of Russian government income, so overall revenue would fall by 3% or so. While significant in absolute terms, fraction-wise Russia can likely manage this shortfall for several years. Even if the impact doubled, Russia should still be able to fund its current military operations for well over a year. Long-term effects of Ukraine's attacks are uncertain. Russia will adapt using Chinese parts for refinery repairs, and it will improve air defenses. Ukraine will continue ramping up its missile production and may receive additional allied support. So there is a vague race against time here. On one side, Russia is facing greater inflation and smaller cash influx. The government will likely play around those budget holes for a while, but it cannot do it forever. Russian population is also facing occasional gas shortages. So in the next few years, Russia might see less money devoted to the war effort and fewer troops being added, with plausibly increasing discontent and war weariness among the population. On the other side, Ukraine will face a similar if not greater war weariness increase, and even fewer fresh troops added, and the Allied financial and material aid will decide the course of the war. Russia or Ukraine might eventually be pressured into a peace deal. It remains to be seen when, after how many casualties, and along which points on the front line. Now more about Supremacy World War III as promised. It's a PvP real-time strategy focused on modern global warfare. There are over 250 tech tree improvements to research and over 100 modern weapons to play with. You start with simple stuff, sure, but you can get stealth bombers, AWACS aircraft, nuke subs, nuclear missiles and many other cool systems. I'd say diplomacy can be very important. The game has alliances, but even there it's crucial to know when you should switch sides. In some matches I had daily plannings with my allies where to go next, and there's a whole marketplace where players trade for resources. I love that. As said, new players will get a cool bonus for free, the Elite Main Battle Tank. So choose your strategy and take over the world. And remember, Binkov may talk about war, but only real peace can bring us all together.